Recently, India changed the base year for two of its most important economic indicators: how it measures inflation and how it measures growth. I'm referring here to the consumer price index and the gross domestic product. On the surface, this tweak looks like a routine statistical update. After all, base years do get revised periodically. But look a little closer, and something far more significant is happening in the Indian context. The weight of food in the inflation basket has dropped sharply. Services are showing up more clearly in GDP. Consumption patterns look very different from what they did even a decade ago. This, therefore, isn't just a routine recalibration of numbers. It is the statistical system mirroring an economy that has fundamentally transformed. You're watching Capital Calculus. I am your host, Anil Padmanabhan. Now, if the data itself changes, does that change how policymakers take decisions? Does this change how the Reserve Bank of India reads inflation, how investors assess growth, how the world understands India's economic story? To unpack all of this, I am joined today by Dr. Saurabh Garg. He's Secretary at the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Dr. Garg, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
I wanted to begin with a very basic question. The rebasing of CPI and GDP. Why do we rebase CPI and GDP, particularly for our viewers?
Uh, for anyone to understand the economy, there are certain macroeconomic indicators which are prepared. GDP and inflation are two very basic. There are others like the labor market, industrial production, etc. But inflation and the growth rate of the economy are something very basic to understand how the economy is doing. We last had the base revision in 2011-12, which came out around 2014-2015, and it's been a decade since then. Over the past decade, there have been changes in consumption patterns, how people are consuming different items. You mentioned about food as one of them. Services consumption has increased. The structure of the economy has changed. There's much greater dependence on the digital economy than it was earlier. And also new data sources have come up, partly due to the fact that the Digital India program has so much more strengthened. But apart from that, a number of other initiatives have taken. So in order to capture the changing patterns, capture the structure of the economy and the data sources, and apart from that, international methodologies also change. For example, now we have a classification which is more granular, which gives more information. So because of all these things, rebasing is a exercise which is done periodically across the world. It's not unique to India. And normally it is done every 5-7 years. This time it got slightly extended in India, partly because of the COVID. There were some delays. And before that, there were some substantial changes in the economy itself. The GST was introduced, etc. So due to these, it got slightly delayed, but that's why we do this rebasing from time to time.
But sir, just a quick follow-up question that the Indian economy, like you said, has structurally changed in the last decade.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will structurally change in the next decade. So how does the statistical system keep pace with this kind of a change?
The data sources that I mentioned capture to a large extent these changes. For example, one of the data sources which we had been using until now and which we continue to use is, for example, corporate returns. So as the company structure changes, their products change, what they are manufacturing gets modified, that automatically gets captured in the revenues and the profits that the companies get, and that gets reflected in the GDP numbers. Similarly, with respect to inflation, there are changes in products, but to a large extent, they anyway get captured in the indices that we prepare. So, from time to time, these changes happen, and I would look at it in a way like you have new models of cars from time to time. So it's not that the earlier model there was anything wrong with it, but technologies improve, methodologies change, and therefore you need to keep up with the times.
Okay, so is there a cadence to this going forward, the base year revisions or these kind of structural tweaks?
Yes, the international norm is around 5 years or so. So 5 to 7 years. Before 2011-12, we had 2003-4, and before that earlier. And one can expect in the next 5 to 7 years, maybe around 2030, 2031, when you can expect the next round of changes to happen.
And this the institution, I should say, has a very illustrious history. We see Mahalanobis initiated it, groomed it, and then it has developed. It has gone through some ups and downs. So now, and it went through some controversies too. But now, how do you feel since you have been in the driver's seat? You have actually shepherded most of this change. And now, simultaneously, the census is beginning, which also feeds for you data for your NSSO sample surveys, etc. So, how do you see in this long history the state of India's statistical system today?
So, absolutely right. The legacy of the Indian statistical system is extremely rich. In fact, in the 1950s, when Professor Mahalanobis was, in a way, guiding the statistical system, the system of surveys was started, and that you can actually calculate GDP by doing surveys of different kinds of household surveys, industrial surveys. And I think that knowledge, that legacy has seeped well into the system. And I think we have an extremely strong statistical system within the government as well as outside. For example, and on the ground and in the various offices across the country, we have nearly 10,000 people who are trained in statistical methods at different levels, and who have, many of whom have done extremely rich academic degrees from institutions across India and outside the country. As any institution, in order to keep up with the times, you need to continue to change constantly. And that's what we have been doing over the past few years by looking at what new technologies have come up. For example, now we don't do any surveys on pen and paper. They are all tablet based. The data that we collect is backed up onto platforms which are now increasingly cloud based. The processing therefore improves and becomes so much more faster. The HR practices ensure that our field staff, we continually train them and equip them with the latest tools and knowledge. Even in dissemination, we have focused a lot. We do regular data users conferences, stakeholder discussions, so that we get feedback from the users and academics who actually use the data. And we have enriched our portals. The portals are so much more user-friendly and intuitive. We now have a mobile app, GOI Stats, where you can have data on the go. We've revamped our microdata unit, where data of individual sample surveys is there, which is extremely essential for research and analysis. So all this has been done with the help of, obviously, the incredible statistical staff that we have, but also with help from external agencies, from technology support institutions, and of course the academia.
So, presumably, given the application of tech, processing speed, we can expect a faster dissemination of data going forward, right?
In fact, if you see in the past couple of years, we've now a cadence that we attempt that any monthly report that we bring out, we should try and bring it out in 15 days, maximum of 30 days. So, for example, we bring out the consumer price index in 12 days, within 12 days of the end of the month, which is among the best internationally. The index for industrial production we bring out within 28 days of the end of the month. And that's our objective, so that before the next month start, if there is anything to be released on a monthly basis, we should do it. Similarly, on a quarterly basis, we bring out data, and our attempt is to bring it out within 45 to 60 days of the end of the quarter. And annual, our attempt is within 90 days or at most 120 days of the end. So that is one in terms of periodicity, so that we ensure that the data is available. But equally important is the fact that the frequency of many of these indicators has improved. We were earlier bringing out labor market data in the urban areas only quarterly and rural only annual. Now we bring out both urban and rural on a monthly basis. Earlier, for the unincorporated sector, the informal sector, which is extremely important, especially where employment is concerned, we only had annual reports. Now we bring out quarterly reports. So our objective is not only to bring it out faster, but bring it out with more frequency. And the third is also to bring it out in a more granular manner. So earlier, where we only brought out at the national level, now we bring out data at the state level. If you look at the CPI, which we have just done the rebasing, the number of markets, on the collection side, there have been number of changes, but on the dissemination side, we now bring out much more granular information in terms of the number of sectors at the state level, at the state and sector level. So all this is extremely useful for academics, for forecasters, for researchers, for companies, so that they can base their decisions on data which is so much more fresh and current.
Absolutely. So just want to come back to our CPI GDP rebasing. So one aspect of the Indian economy is that a large chunk is informal. So do they get captured in both these indices adequately?
Absolutely right that it's obviously more difficult to capture unincorporated and informal sector data. But we have a number of mechanisms that we do that. We used to do that even in the earlier series, but obviously we have improved those techniques. Number one is now, for the past 3 years, we bring out an annual survey of unincorporated sector enterprises. So that's a kind of survey which goes household to household and gets an idea of what kind of activities, economic activities that people are doing within their houses. So it might be not registered, it might just be a tailoring, sewing, a person doing, making some clothes, or ironing clothes, or whatever, doing tuition for children, etc. So we capture that at the household level. And also at the small enterprise level, vendors on the streets, etc. That data is captured, and we do that on an annual basis. The second thing that is helping us is the fact that some of the smaller, slightly bigger informal enterprises do get registered, for example, in the GST. So we get data from the GST also, and that helps. And apart from that, because of the penetration of the digital part of the economy, a lot of activities get captured. For example, vehicles are better captured in e-Vahan, and we get that data. So a combination of this is ensuring that the informal sector gets captured. It was getting captured earlier, but at that time we might be doing it periodically. At the base year, we do a detailed survey and then capture it periodically. Now we have mechanisms to do it on an annual basis. For example, last year we just did a construction activities survey, and that's given us a lot of rich data. And then we, using other indicators, we then look at what are the changes that happen from year to year.
Fascinating to see the multiple sources of data. Maybe even 2 decades ago, half these data sources wouldn't have existed.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention about another one, the periodic labor force survey, which now we bring out on a monthly basis. So that gives us an idea of how labor movement, labor market activities are happening, and a large proportion of that is in the informal sector. So that gives us now a monthly kind of a data which we didn't have even until a few years back.
The good news and bad news of such a state-of-the-art statistical system is that it's very difficult to spin rumors. So for politicians to spin stories or analysts like me to spin stories, it becomes far more difficult if the facts don't hold
Yes,
up your
absolutely.
argument.
Or even internationally, look at the narrative of any country. It's built around employment, it's built around growth, it's built around
Inflation.
inflation. And these numbers are very, very necessary to understand what an economy is doing. And our objective is to ensure that credible data, reliable data is available as fast as possible. And there should be no vacuum of credible data. That's our objective. In fact, the Honorable Prime Minister had recently mentioned that we need to do better measurement because whatever gets measured gets improved and ultimately gets transformed. So when we are talking of a transformation of the country in terms of the Viksit Bharat 2047, it's extremely necessary that we have credible data, granular data, timely data, robust data, so that the decisions that we make, the interventions that the governments make or the private sector makes, is based on reliable data, and that guides these interventions so much more accurately.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that in the CPI, the food index has fallen, the weight. That's largely because our consumption patterns have changed.
Yeah.
People are consuming more, doing more discretionary spending, which is beyond food, right?
Yes.
Beyond the staples. So I just want to be the devil's advocate here. How much, is there a risk that because the weight is lower, you may be misreading the food inflation or, ignoring the impact on certain sections
Yeah.
as a policy planner?
Sure. See, what does inflation measure? We are trying to measure the impact of prices as the household faces them. And how do we calculate the weight of the different items? That's based on the household expenditure survey that we do. We did two back-to-back surveys in 22-23 and then 23-24 to get an idea of what are the major items that households across different income levels and across the country purchase. So based on that, and given the fact that there has been a significant improvement of economic levels over the past decade or so, it was seen that the amount of expenditure that households are doing on food items has considerably reduced. And this has been substituted by expenditures on different services, especially conveyance and transport, both in terms of commuting on a daily basis and for recreational purposes. On other services that are being consumed, whether health, education, and communication and mobile, etc. So, and food, and this is internationally a well-known fact that as income levels rise, the proportion of expenditure that any household spends on food reduces. So to the extent that the expenditure is less, the impact of any changes in price on food items would to that extent be lesser on any household, and that is what the inflation numbers capture. It's not that it's insignificant. It's still more than 1/3 of the expenditure is on food and other items, and therefore it still continues to impact, but definitely at a lower rate than what was seen in the previous decade.
So now, other thing I want to ask you is that given the makeover of so many databases on the Indian economy, I remember when we used to cover the Ministry of Finance more than a decade ago, the concern among policy planners was, or even Reserve Bank of India was, they never had real time or near real time inflation, growth. In fact, the GDP projection of January they use to project for the entire year. So now, of course, it's much easier than what it was a decade ago. Now, given all these changes that you have undertaken, including on the CPI, does this ease the task of the Reserve Bank of India, which is unfortunately been given the sole task of managing inflation in this country. I mean, unenviable task. So, do you think it will become easier? Because most of us commentators outside believe they are flying blind almost. I mean, they have proxy variables, they also have used statistical machinery, but effectively they are flying blind.
See, the motto of our ministry is data for development. And our objective is to ensure that increasingly more and more decisions are data driven. In fact, that's one focus that even the Honorable Prime Minister had. I must give a quotation that Honorable Prime Minister made last year in the Civil Services Day, which is in April every year. And he said, and that was this, he was addressing all bureaucrats and civil servants. He said that we must become experts in data-driven decision making so that policy design and implementation become more accurate. So I think this in a way summarizes what we are trying to do to ensure that we provide real-time data, granular data, timely data, etc., to different decision makers, whether within the government, in the private sector, or for that matter, in the Reserve Bank of India. So, no doubt, increased granularity and robustness of the inflation data would be helpful to the Reserve Bank and others, whether in the government or outside. But as you would realize that any particular decision is not made with only one set of data. There are a number of other data sets that are used. And to the extent that each of those data sets gets improved, our expectation and desire is that decision making will improve. And I'm sure this is also the case where monetary policy is concerned for the Reserve Bank of India.
Because Ananta, who was also a guest on the show, we had gone over this briefly on how data challenges make their task that much more difficult. I wanted to bring you to the other aspect which has come out in the GDP numbers is the reflection of the share of services.
Yeah.
But these are all new sectors relatively. I mean, real estate, financial, professional services. So, both at the central and state government, how difficult is it for you to measure such a non-tangible thing like a service? Like in a factory, you can capture the product through GST, etc. But how do you do this with an intangible like a service?
Yes. See, there are two aspects to this. One is the services, for example, which are provided by the government, and large activities are all services to citizens. So they get captured in the government accounts, in the government budgets, on the expenditures that happen, the financial part, which in a way gets reflected in the GDP national accounts also. And now we have, in fact, a much better system of tracking these services, which is the Public Financial Management System, the PFMS, which actually you can track what service has been delivered at what, in which village, in which panchayat. At that level of granularity you can obtain. So I think as far as government related activities, it's very easy to capture. It was earlier in budgets, but it was on pen and paper. Now it's digital and much more granular. As far as the private sector goes, for the corporate sector, where all large companies prepare their annual accounts, quarterly accounts, and which are published, which are available. So it's quite easy to get the data of that and which gets incorporated. Where earlier we had much greater problems was the informal sector or the unincorporated sector, or what you call also as the household sector. But as I mentioned earlier, now we have an annual survey that we do of the unincorporated sector, and we get those data quarterly. And apart from that, we are now starting another one for the formal sector, All India, the service sector enterprises survey, which will also capture this at a much more greater level also for the formal sector. And along with GST, along with the greater penetration of the digital economy, all this is helping us to capture the services, which are extremely important because now they constitute more than half of the economy.
Exactly.
And a lot of these services also gets captured through the labor market because they are manpower intensive. And the periodic labor force survey, which we do, and we bring out data on a monthly basis. So it captures these movements, including, for example, for the gig economy and others. So these get captured through this. So now we have a number of mechanisms
To map
and
this.
to map this. Absolutely.
So, which means this, like you have an annual survey of industries, you're now going to have an annual survey of services.
Annual survey of the formal sector, incorporated, because the annual survey of industries focuses only on the manufacturing side. So on the agriculture side, we have a number of data, for example, the crops, the horticulture, and the value addition that happens. On the manufacturing side, we had this annual survey of industries, and we have the corporate sector data also from the MCA database. As I mentioned, the informal sector we are capturing separately. One gap that we had was the formal service sector, which we will be capturing through this annual survey that we have now.
Okay. Finally, sir, I wanted to ask you that all that you said, the good news on the statistical system is the kinks have been fixed. Now, near real time data is available on a wide range, and emerging sectors also you're preparing. So, the key thing that emerges from all of this is credibility, which is fundamental to not just foreign investors but domestic investors too. So, your final thoughts on the Indian statistical system and the signal it sends on credibility to not just India but the entire world.
See, number one, must say that we have a very long legacy. You mentioned about it of our statistical system, and the knowledge, the experts that we have on our system are extremely good. Credibility is something that we keep uppermost, because when we talk of data, data needs to be credible, to be believed, to people to have faith. And there are a number of activities we do to ensure this credibility. The first and foremost is maintaining transparency. We bring out all our reports as per a scheduled advance release calendar, bring it out on time, which also adds to ensuring this credibility. Bring it out in a transparent manner, along with the data which goes behind those indices, so people can check and validate whether that's being done or not. And bring it out in a manner that is accessible to people through our portals, through our websites, which, as I mentioned, are becoming more intuitive and more user-friendly. So even people who are not experts in data, but even they can understand it. Our focus is a lot more on bringing out charts and infographics so that people can understand it much more easier. We extensively use the social media. And so that people, whoever depends on what kind of social media they prefer, that it's available. So accessibility, availability, transparency is one very basic tenet that we focus on. The second is that we follow standards and definitions and classifications which are internationally accepted. So if you want to compare across countries, across states, it's very easy to do it. We use data and data sets which are comparable. And we constantly have discussions with different international organizations, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and others who set standards. Sectorally, there are different institutions internationally we do it. So we continually interact with them, get their feedback on where there might be data gaps, and ensure that we work on it and ensure that we follow those standards. The third set of activities, which I would especially like to mention, is ensuring that we maintain outreach with researchers, academics, forecasters. After any change, before or after, we have been bringing out discussion papers, asking for comments so that how we can improve it, and also discussing with them and getting their feedback on what needs to be done and if they have any suggestions for improvement. I think any system can constantly improve, and that's what we are trying. And I think it's the sincerity of our efforts, it's the transparency of what we are doing, and ensuring that we respond to feedback that we get. We have on our website, we have a button where people can put in their feedback, and we ensure that we respond to that feedback. So a combination of these, I'm sure, will only enhance the credibility. I must mention that given our strong statistical system and the kind of experts that we have in our system, I would think that our credibility was already very high, but we want to ensure that it remains among the best globally.
Great positive note to sign off on. Thank you very much for
Thank
speaking
you.
to us.
Pleasure to be here.
I hope you enjoyed the discussion with Dr. Garg as much as I did. To sum up, the rebasing of CPI and GDP marks the statistical recognition of a deeper reality. India's economy has evolved from one defined by subsistence constraints to one increasingly shaped by discretionary consumption and service led growth. When households trade up, the economy itself changes character. Inflation becomes less volatile, growth becomes more diversified, and macroeconomic stability becomes easier to sustain. Therefore, inflation indices and national accounts should not be viewed only as technical constructs, remote from a lived experience. In reality, they mirror the country's economic structure. When that structure changes, the mirror changes with it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to stratnewsglobal.tech on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please to share your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions with us. I'm available on X at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.